Matt, there was a big boom in New Hampshire. Everybody was talking about it. Saturday night, we had this big boom. And I'm wondering, you're the weather guy. Do you know what that might be?
All right, so this was just prior to 7:30 on Saturday evening, right? Southeast New Hampshire, seacoast, all the way back to like Plastow, down into Haverhill in northeast Massachusetts, parts of the Merrimack Valley. Here's the thing. What could it have been? I mean, the list goes on and on and on about what it could have been, right? I remember we had a big boom that was up in central New Hampshire a while back. It was someone blowing up tannerite. We actually think the conditions were most favorable for a frost quake to have occurred on Saturday evening. Everything kind of fits perfectly to that. So chances are good this was a frost quake, which, I don't know, have you ever heard of a frost quake before?
Matt, I have never heard of a frost quake. It sounds very hardcore. It sounds like the cooler version, literally, of an earthquake. So what is a frost quake? How does this happen?
Well, it could be the name of a new band that plays at the local bar, right? It's also called a cryoseism, but that's the sciencey word for it. What happens is you get a ground that's near freezing because it's been cold recently. You put down water into that ground, all right? And the ground softens enough that it goes above freezing, so it melts a bit. So you get rain, or you can get rain and snow melt, and you get all this coming together, and it really soaks the ground. Then what happens is you get a cold front that comes through, and you get a real quick surge of cold air. The water turns to ice. Now, you think about when you pour water into an ice cube tray in the freezer, right? If you fill it all the way to the brim, when you go and look, the ice is going to be heaping over because the water expands when it freezes. So imagine the same thing happening if you've got a really wet ground, at least in those top several inches of the ground. You put water in between there, it seeps in all the cracks, it gets in the dirt, it gets in the little cracks inside the rocks, it gets between the rocks, and then the temperature drops because colder air comes in from the north, and all of a sudden the water turns to ice, and boom. When it expands, it can split the dirt, it can split the rock, and it creates basically a line of where the earth kind of separated. It doesn't really do damage. There's not the same kind of power behind it you might have with an earthquake when you have plates shifting under the ground and all that. If you have enough snow on the ground, you probably know this, snow is a good insulator, right? So you can make an igloo out of snow or whatever. You can make a snow fort. It'll keep you warm, right? I mean, it actually insulates. So if you had, let's say, half a foot of snow that was still on the ground, the cold air coming in would never get down that fast and freeze it that quickly. But because we really didn't have much, if any, snow on the ground, and then all of a sudden we cooled it off, boom, you're able to freeze it, split it, and create that kind of rattling that was occurring.
So I don't have to brace myself for like an earthquake. My house isn't going to get shook up, but it might scare my cats, or even me. I mean, I'm jumpy.
Yeah, we had a lot of folks that were jumping. I mean, that's really why this gained some traction, is because folks say, whoa, what was that? In the longer term, you can look back and you can go back and look at the seismograms and say, okay, did anything record anything? So one thing that I can do and my team can do on our first alert team is go back and look at these and say, is there anything that showed any sign of an earthquake? And there's no sign of it whatsoever. Again, can I be 100% certain? I can't, because like I said, we've had instances where people are being goofballs and blowing stuff up and creating these big booms that are heard for miles and miles around. But given the way the weather conditions were that night, and given the fact that we didn't get any reports to any police departments about people doing things like that, I have to say this is probably the most likely thing that happened.
Well, that's great. Asked and answered. So now I know that there's frostquakes. Always ask a meteorologist first to get the answer. So thank you so much, Matt.
I hope everybody learned a little something. Thanks, Rob.